seconds left. Getting it home. There they go!
Evans for three. Got them all! Shot clock off, 4-point game. DeJulius puts up a three. Yes! And a goal!
Bearcat Blitz on the Believe Network. Welcome in, everybody. I'm your host, Russ Heltman of Cincinnati Bearcats on SI, and he's my co-host, Neil Meyer from Rivals Cincinnati Bearcats Athletics coverage site, thefrontofficenews.com. Cincinnati Bearcats football has one spring practice remaining. That is this afternoon, Friday, April 18th, and they will be closing up shop on team full field activities until fall camp. In the meantime, after that, we'll get to our takeaways, kind of our full look at the spring practice slates, and just kind of our thoughts on the spring session overall to close the show today. But first, we have to start with transfer portal happenings on the basketball and football front. We'll note Jeremiah Gray, the new defensive line commit for Cincinnati football as well. And we have Dan Skillings headed to Baylor, Connor Hickman headed to College of Charleston, Moustapha Thiam possibly becoming a Cincinnati Bearcat by way of UCF, and a offensive tackle addition that could be very huge for the Bearcats in the next few days or next few weeks when I expect this guy to eventually commit. I would be pretty shocked if the way things are trending right now do not end up seeing a guy by the name of Joe Cotton become the newest left tackle edition or offensive tackle edition in general for the Cincinnati Bearcats. We'll get to all that, but first, got to get to our sponsors here on Bearcat Blitz. These messages, and we'll get into the show after this. Stick with us. Neil, the big news of the day to start is with a big fella in the front court for UCF right now, but soon to be not a UCF Knight in Moustapha Thiam. Cincinnati had huge problems with this guy, Neil, last season. He was a big reason why UCF destroyed Cincinnati in the final contest of the season in the college basketball crown. 7'2", 235-pound freshman center. Neil, I'm shocked that he's not in the NBA draft, given how he performed in his lone season in college basketball. 10.4 points per game, 6.4 rebounds, a Big 12 leading 2.6 blocks per game on 49.8% shooting from the field. That lowered because of a pretty healthy three-point diet of 2.3 attempts per game. He hit 29% of his threes last season. Neil, this would be like getting an absolutely supercharged version of Aziz Bandaogo with 3 years of eligibility remaining.
Yeah, absolutely, Russ. And I think it's great to kind of note on the aspect of Moustapha Thiam declaring for the draft. Well, he reclassified from 2025 to 2024 and was a top 30 prospect in the 2024 class, but probably would have been a top 10, 15 player in the 25 class without reclassifying. So obviously he's still a little younger, on the younger side, but it's made a huge impact in year one in the Big 12 in college basketball, especially down in Orlando for UCF. And it is exactly what you mentioned, Russ, a supercharged Aziz Bandaogo. And I think that's a great metaphor, great way to kind of describe his style of play. But he brings a lot more to the table than what Aziz Bandaogo did, especially on the offensive end. Aziz Bandaogo gave you everything you needed on the defensive end. He had his moments throughout his career where he had big offensive nights, but majority of the time you knew what you were getting, and it was on the defensive end. But Moustapha Thiam brings a whole different kind of energy to the way he plays. Russ, there was one game in particular where he finished with double points, double rebounds, and nearly 5 blocks in a game. That is huge. He had looking down at the stats right now, he had 11 points, 10 rebounds, and 8 blocks versus Kansas State this year in the Knights win over Kansas State. That is huge. That is huge. And Russ, you're looking at how this roster is building out for Cincinnati. You get your commitment from Kirk Carissa. You get your commitment from Sincere Harris. Then you get your other transfer portal additions. You look at where Cincinnati's roster is building right now. What they desperately need is a big-time forward, big-time center. Mustafa Thiam is everything and that. 7'2", 235 pounds, who averaged nearly 11 points per game, 6 rebounds on 50% shooting. It's a very, very big name to keep an eye on for Cincinnati.
At this point, Cincinnati feels like the full-fledged leader in the clubhouse to get his services, spearheaded by the recruitment and talent acquisition skills of new GM Corey Evans. And we're trending towards a similar situation to how I feel about Joe Cotton, the South Dakota transfer tackle for Cincinnati football. Neil, I would be shocked if Moustapha Thiam, the way things are trending right now, is not a Cincinnati Bearcat, and we're not talking about him on as one of the latest transfer additions, either this time next week or this time 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we will be talking. The way things are trending, everything seems to be going in favor for Cincinnati right now to land Moustapha Thiam. And heck, Russ, for all we know, we are recording this on Friday at 11 a.m. Heck, we don't know. Transfer portal's wild. Something could happen this afternoon for all we know. So,
Right.
Overall, but it's kind of been interesting, especially with how Cincinnati's been a little quiet in the portal. You knew something was brewing, and hopefully it brews up into a storm where Mustafa Thiam ends up in the red and black here in Clifton for the 2025-2026 season.
Would be a massive addition. And good note there, Neil. He would have declared for the NBA draft, I'm almost assured, if he was. I mean, he'd probably not even eligible right now. He might not even be hitting the 18 age mark. So yeah, he's a definitive like lottery talent. He would be a top 20 pick, in my opinion, no doubt about it, given his ceiling and the way he's played at such a young age in the sport, especially a guy, Neil, who has not played organized basketball at a high level his entire life. He's not like some guy who grew up in the AAU circuits coming over from Dakar, Senegal. He is still pretty kind of raw and new to all of this high level college basketball, high level basketball life. And he obviously did not have much trouble with it, all things considered, as a freshman last season. Dan Skillings to Baylor, Neil. He is one of the first fresh roster additions for a Baylor team that literally did not have a single player on the roster until Dan might have been the first full true commitment for the team, but he was definitely, Neil, one of the first few guys to become the latest batch of players for Scott Drew, a batch of players that is going to be completely brand new for the Baylor Bears in 2024 or 2025, 26.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, Russ, because we're talking about Dan Skillings making the transition from Cincinnati down to Baylor, but he started a visit with Baylor on Tuesday, and then he commits on Tuesday night. He had visits slated with LSU on Wednesday that he didn't even attend to from the sounds of it, but he had a lot of interest. Florida, LSU, Gonzaga, Baylor. I'm sure there was plenty of other schools out there in the mix for him as well, but this is a Baylor team that literally, Russ, like you mentioned, roster was completely depleted. You had multiple guys leave for the NBA or graduate, and then you saw the transfer portal. So Dan Skilling's probably going to be one of the big-time additions down there for Baylor, and I know they're not done yet. Obviously, with the transfer portal, not many teams are done yet. But it will be interesting to see how does Dan Skillings take this jump at Baylor. Do we see something similar to what Victor Locken took this past year at Clemson? Or will we even get the opportunity to see Dan Skillings back at Fifth Third Arena this year, depending on if Baylor makes the trip up to Cincinnati this season in conference play as well? So there's a lot of things to keep an eye on with Dan Skillings moving to Baylor. Obviously, a homecoming would be great for Dan, in my opinion at least, but it's going to be interesting to see what he does this season for Baylor.
Yeah, just, it just doesn't work out sometimes. Had huge expectations for Dan Skillings. Then, of course, in pure Cincinnati metro area sports fashion, an injury derails that entire projection in game one, and he was just never able to really get back into a high trajectory push the rest of the season. All the best to Dan. Hope he has a fantastic final year of eligibility with Baylor and can set himself up for strong professional opportunities in the ensuing years after that. Neil, one more note here on the basketball side of things. Connor Hickman, we'll see if he gets the extra year of eligibility. There is a definitive rule that they would be breaking, the NCAA would be, if they gave Connor Hickman the extra year of eligibility. But headed to play for former Xavier coach Chris Mack at College of Charleston if that waiver ends up being granted, which fingers crossed for Connor Hickman it is, and he can rebound after a rough injury-related season at Cincinnati in his lone season with the Bearcats.
Yeah, and it's worth noting too, Russ, just how things have been going in the transfer portal. There's so many names and players within the transfer portal that enter knowing they might not have another year of eligibility due to a medical red shirt or a hardship waiver, or they're just out of eligibility hoping they can find a loophole to get another year. It is crazy to me, right? I know there's a lot of situations. I know we see it all on social media, but Connor Hickman has a very good case of getting this medical hardship waiver and being eligible for Charleston this year. Now it's going to be interesting to see if it happens, but you hated to see how things went for Connor Hickman here in Cincinnati, right? He tried his hardest to fight through an injury, and ultimately it got worse. So you have to give the kid his credit and his flowers where they're due. Like, he tried to fight through the injury. Some things are just hard to overcome from. But without Connor Hickman this season, Russ, I think it's safe to say Cincinnati does not beat Xavier in the non-con slate. And I think that's safe to say. His energy off the bench, his tenacity, his scoring ability really came in and gave Cincinnati a lift when they needed it the most. And that's something fans will always remember about Connor Hickman, was his performance versus Xavier this past year to stop a 6-year losing streak to the crosstown rival.
Yeah, gave it his all for the Bearcats and played it hurt for a few games before ultimately just not being able to get it going on a broken foot. No barbs to be thrown there. I mean, the dude's foot was busted. What are you going to do? It's just the way things goes. 2 injury affected kind of final seasons in Bearcat black and red for Dan Skillings and Connor Hickman. We'll take a quick break here, and then we'll get to the football side of things. A commitment in the class of 2025, a commitment in the class of 2026, a defensive line commitment there, and an offensive line visit that is very notable, and I think will lead to the Bearcats, if not first, their maybe biggest addition in the spring transfer portal window along the offensive line. All that coming up on Bearcat Blitz. Neil, getting to the offensive line commitment on Tuesday, or not the offensive line. I mean, there's just so many. There's so much news in the trenches. I'm getting them all mixed up. But the defensive line commitment on Tuesday, Jeremiah Gray, 2026 defensive tackle, commits to the Cincinnati Bearcats. Not ranked on a major service, is the Bearcats' first defensive line commitment in the class. And we'll see if Gray ends up getting a ranking from one of the major outlets here in the next few weeks. But the Central High School defensive tackle, kind of, Neil, a diamond in the rough, a guy that likely could burst onto the scene and really impact the defensive line recruiting rankings this coming fall, if especially if the Sharks start to circle around another player that Cincinnati finds in the thick of the kind of unranked talent pool.
Yeah, absolutely, Russ. And for Jeremiah Gray, you look down at the profile and the stature that he plays with. He has not been playing organized football for more than just 2 years, roughly. And on top of it, look at his frame: 6'7", 250-pound defensive lineman. I'm sure he's probably going to try to bulk up early from heading into the season, probably put a little bit more muscle on. But 6'7", 250 pounds, that is size you cannot teach in the recruiting realms, especially at that defensive lineman position. And as Cincinnati makes this transition to the Big 12 and they take the next step into the Big 12, what have you begun to see over and over and over again in conference play is these bigger, physical, longer, tall, athletic defensive and offensive linemen. And Jeremiah Gray, despite only playing football for just about 2 years, it essentially is another diamond in the rough home run for Scott Satterfield and this coaching staff, Jack Griffith, Cass Simmons. This is a diamond in the rough player. But man, Russ, if you give him a year with a big senior season, he comes in, graduates early, comes in early, gets a full offseason with Cincinnati, opportunity to coach with Nico Palizzetti in the weight room, get out there for a full spring ball. This could be somebody who Cincinnati could potentially have as an impact player in 2026, 2027 season, right off the rip, just due to what size and physicality he brings and he plays with.
Yeah, I would be thoroughly shocked if that happened, Neil, but a player that could definitely help the Bearcats down the line. Moving to the offensive tackle position in the transfer portal front there, once again, this time on the football side of things, South Dakota offensive tackle Joe Cotton. A lot of smoke with this guy between him and the Cincinnati Bearcats. Set up a reported visit already with Cincinnati. I think that already happened earlier in the week. And he has played over 1,400 snaps for the Coyotes, Neil, in the past 2 seasons. 6'7", 310 pounds, held a strong 81.1 Pro Football Focus grade last season with the Coyotes. 2 years of eligibility left. Man, this would be a just huge addition, Neil, because neither of those offensive tackle spots are on firm, solid ground right now.
Correct, and this would be a huge addition. Russ, you look down, and I know we talked to Scott Satterfield after the spring showcase, and he even said it, that they will be looking at offensive linemen within the transfer portal. And you look down, Joe Cotton is a guy that fits the mold and could come in and be a starter right away. And what's interesting to note too, Russ, is his size.
He will start day one if he becomes a Bearcat. I would be shocked the other direction if he is not starting this fall.
And you look at some of the schools that he is hearing from so far in the portal. He has set visits for Cincinnati and Wisconsin. But you look down at some of the other schools that have reached out to him: Alabama, Iowa, Baylor, Colorado, Florida, Louisville, Michigan, Oklahoma State, Ole Miss, Penn State, Wisconsin, West Virginia, USC, South Carolina, UCF. There's a lot of schools in the mix right now for him. But to see that he has set up visits for Wisconsin and Cincinnati are both great signs. And for Joe Cotton, it's great to see too, because look at how Cincinnati has been able to lock down transfers in the past. This staff has done a great job at getting them on campus and being able to seal the deal before they let them leave, which if that was something that happens for Cincinnati, that would be a huge addition.
And we don't have this. I don't have this confirmed right now. We'll have to talk to Joe once he gets here. Hopefully he's able to become a Cincinnati Bearcat just for the future success of the program this fall and beyond. But you see, Neil, they're almost always first with this staff. They're almost always the first staff to identify the talent and reach out to that talent. Taden Barnes, Steven Rusnak. I mean, look at the transfers of years past. So many of them will tell you that Cincinnati was the first one in the door, and how much that carries weight is so huge in these transfers' eyes, especially when you're comparing similar NIL offers, you're comparing similar payment packages. When you know that one school did the groundwork on their own without any other pings from an offer from another school, they were able to identify you themselves and pick you out of the rough, pick you out of the patch. That can carry a lot of weight with these guys, which makes a lot of sense because you want to feel wanted and you want to feel like you were at the top of mind, the top of the player heap level for the school you're going to, not just this other school saw it, so this guy must be good because this other school identified him. Not really the case with a lot of Cincinnati's talents. The staff has done a great job of identifying people early, and specifically with recruiting, it just kind of is what it is when you identify guys early and then they end up getting SEC offers and they flip from UC to SEC schools. Sometimes the money talks louder and you just can't do anything about that, but you can control how easily and quickly you identify these talents, and Cincinnati has done a great job with that controllable aspect. For Neil Meyer, I'm Russ Heltman. This has been Bearcat Blitz presented by Bet Online. One more quick thought, Neil, just overall on spring practice, they stayed healthy. They put together a lot of great reps, and I think the fact that they stayed relatively healthy, I don't know about you, but I didn't hear about any major issues, any major injuries that are going to keep guys kept guys out of the majority of spring practice, or going to keep guys on the sidelines leading into fall camp in just a couple months. That health was huge for this program, I think, in the spring period, and the continuity of the leadership group returning from last year, especially on offense, to help beef up some of these guys that are new to the program this year. That really stood out to me when you think about Gavin Gerhardt coming back to be the heart and soul of that offensive line. Brendan Sorsby coming back and not having to have another new quarterback learn another new system. You got Jack Dingle coming back, who I think Dan Horde in our media scrum with Dingle the other day asked Jack, have you ever played in the same defense in back-to-back years? And he hasn't done that since his sophomore season, when he didn't play nearly as many snaps back then as he's playing right now. Continuity, Neil, was really, really felt in my eyes across these 14 and now 15 spring practices that we'll be at later on today. But that continuity and the ability to have that continuity lead to no issues health-wise, I think that pairing right there is going to make Cincinnati be able to springboard into kickoff practice, into more install with the offense, into more diverse calls with the defense once we get to Camp Higher Ground this fall. And then when you have that sets you up very well, Neil, in a season where you have a power conference opponent, a neck and neck, nip tuck battle, less than a touchdown spread underdog opponent on the first game of the year against Nebraska.
Yeah, and it's worth noting too, Russ, that the continuity is huge, right? We didn't see that many overhauls. We didn't see many guys exit. We saw Ken Willis exit earlier this week. Jordan Robinson just signed with Virginia. I don't know if you saw that, but overall, those were the two major exits after spring ball, was Jordan Robinson and Ken Willis. And obviously, Jordan Robinson's already found a new home. Ken Willis still searching for his, but the defense kind of looked set, right, on Saturday in the spring showcase. They stayed healthy for majority of the most part. I know there was a couple guys who had little banged up things, but
yeah, like Dante Corleone, he didn't participate Saturday, but he was out there Monday, and he was out there in the shortened rain practice Monday, and he was out there like normal from what I could see on Wednesday. So they're just kind of giving these veterans, deal, I think, smartly some days off, because you want to get, you might think those reps are even more valuable. They probably are even more valuable for the young guys. And then you have the ability to beef those guys up and get them ready in case there is that influx of injury that happens to almost every football team every season.
Yeah, and staying fully healthy for the most part was huge. I know we have seen injuries go down in years past. 2 years ago, we saw Joey Belgian tear an ACL that kept him out the whole year. He was never able to kind of bounce back from that. We've also seen other major injuries come. I know Dante Corleone had his health situation last year that kind of kept him out for majority of the offseason workouts as well. So overall, to see Cincinnati fully healthy, especially coming out of the 80-play spring showcase, that was a huge positive sight to see.
For Neil Meyer, I'm Russ Heltman. Fun Bearcat Blitz to enter the weekend. We'll talk to you all twice again next week on the Believe Network.
This is the second. 15 seconds left. Shot clock off. 4-point game. DeJulius puts up a three.